Hello, everybody. I hope session number 5 helped you out a lot. Session number 6 is continuing with our life science. So this is going to talk about taxonomy and how to go between class, genus, species, all that good stuff. And it's also going to start touching on some of the basic principles of ecology. So there'll be a little bit about food webs and speciation in there, a little bit about habituation, but most of this one is about taxonomy. Again, life science is a little bit memorization heavy, so it'd be a good idea to kind of hop on Quizlet, get some flashcards going here. It's an awesome study tool. But I hope this session is helpful for you. It's one of our shorter ones at 33 minutes. So happy studying, and I'll see you in session number 7. They all belong to. What do we think? I see some people thinking. What are we thinking tonight? Okay, I've got a couple answers popping up on the chat. While people are thinking, I'm going to start teaching. So we'll come back to this question and see if we can answer it in the next couple of minutes. So, oh, excuse me. I'm eating at the same time. I really apologize, guys. So, middle school people, here are some names that you might need to know. First name is Aristotle. So Aristotle was the first person to come up with the basis of our classification system. He theorized that there were 2 groups, plant and animal. Boom. Next, we have a guy named Linnaeus, who further classified plant and animals by dividing them into 2 related groups. So he came up with the 2 kingdom system. Whitaker in 1969 then expanded it to include 5 kingdoms, and now currently we are at 7. So taxonomy, the classifications we're going to go through, are up to 7 levels of classification that all living organisms can be thrown into. So we have a 7-level system, but the name that you really want to know is Linnaeus, because he is like the father of this modern system that we are now using. Started with Aristotle, Linnaeus improved it. Whitaker said, let's expand it out a little bit more. But Linnaeus is the one that they like to ask you about the most. So in our current 7-level classification system, it looks like this little picture with the mushrooms on the left side. So the first, it starts from most specific and goes down to least specific. So it goes from least to most specific. I am stuttering. The least specific category is life. Then you have domain, and then you have kingdom. So today we have 3 domains that are separated into 6 major kingdoms. And this is where the major change came from Whitaker to our current system. In Whitaker's system, there were less kingdoms. If you look in this chart right here, and again, I will send out all these notes, so I know some people are trying to write these down, and I meant to send them out earlier, I'm sorry. The 3 major domains are prokarya, archaea, and eukarya. The easiest, so in the original system is just prokarya and eukarya. They added this archaea, which covers just archaea bacteria, which are a little bit different than the regular prokarya bacteria. We, humans, fall under eukarya, which probably makes sense because yesterday we mentioned that we have eukaryotic cells, so eukarya, eukaryotic. And in our kingdom, there's also protista, plantae, fungi, and animalia, like us. So getting a little bit more specific, you have phylums. A phylum is a label used to group living things together based on some common features. So something like chordata, that is humans, fish, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and mammals. So all of these specimens have similar characteristics, and that's what throws them in the same phylum. Another example of a phylum would be like arthropoda, which would be your insects with that hard exoskeleton. So crabs, lobsters, some spiders, scorpions, all fall under that same phylum. Becoming even more specific, you have a class. So a class is comprised of organisms that share a common attribute. So mammalia, like us, mammals, belong to the phylum Chordata. So as humans, we are mammals, which is why we belong to the mammalian class. And we are in the phylum Chordata, which is under the eukaryote kingdom, if we keep giving us our name. An order is comprised of organisms that have similar natures. So it's not just enough to say that we're all mammals, because you know that mammal is a very broad term. Under the umbrella of mammal, you have more specific categories, and that more specific category is an order. So for example, in our class Mammalia, you have Chiroptera, which are bats. You have Carnivora, which would be any meat-eating animal like cat or dogs, or us. Since I guess we could be omnivora. Or Cetacea, I can't see it, there we go, which are whales, and some dolphins. We cool? Am I moving too quick? All right, okay. Getting more specific, you have a family. I like Dreamgirls, but I'm not gonna sing the song that reminds me of this. We'll skip that part. But a family is comprised of organisms that have evolved from the same ancestors and therefore share common characteristics. So all of these are based on common characteristics or common attributes. However, when we get down to family and genus, this more has to do with like very specific ancestry lineage. So this is where you start to see a difference between mammals as in apes and mammals as in humans, okay? And that's because we belong to different genuses. So if you think about the Latin name for a human, it's Homo sapien, right? Or Homo erectus is where we came from, and Homo sapien. That is starting to get to our genus name. So that's where we get that from. Another example would be up here. So the scientific name for a lion is Panthera leo. Panthera is its genus name, and we know it's a genus because it's italicized. And then Leo would be its species, which is the last level at the bottom. So when we say we sapiens, Homo is our genus, sapien is our species.
You can remember that with like the zodiac sign, Leo, because it has the lion.
I'm a Leo, in case you wanted to know. My birthday is August 18th, which is always the first day of when teachers go back to work. So I spent the last 6 years at work on my birthday. Okay, sorry.
We all know about Libras.
Huh? Josh, you talking trash?
All about the Libras. Anyway, carry on.
Okay. So the most specific group that we can get down to is a species. The biggest difference between species and genus is the ability to reproduce. So if you are of the same species, that means you can produce viable offspring, right? It is important to note there are some exceptions to this rule. So if you think about a mule is its own species. However, a mule cannot produce its own offspring, right? So there are a couple exceptions to this species rule, but for the most part, you have to be able to produce viable offspring to be of the same species. So that's why humans and monkeys are not of the same species, because we cannot produce offspring with one another. Same genus, different species. So in my chart right here, I just have two examples of our classification system. First is humans, second is a dog. We both belong to the same kingdom. We're both belong to the same phylum and class. However, we start to separate at the order level. We are primates, dogs are carnivores.
Having a hard time here.
Where the president and the White House that wasn't really focused on the laser to the daily threat.
It was Josh. Got it. We start to separate from one another at the order level. So we are primates, dogs are carnivores. Then from there we get more specific. So if I had put a monkey up here as well, you would see that we would go down all the way to the Homo level and then separate as sapien. So let's look back at that question from the warm-up. Human beings, reptiles, birds, and fish all belong to the same what? Some of you were right, and some of you, there we go, Matt. Appreciate you, sir. See, some people rethinking their answers, and some people were right from the beginning, which means they didn't need me for that. Look at it. You guys are great. I'm seeing a bunch of D's in the chat, and I agree. Humans, reptiles, birds, and fish are all of the same phylum. Okay. Family is way too specific. Let's look at another example here. In this chart, I have 4 different organisms. And what it wants you to do first is figure out which 2 organisms are most closely related. So I have a house cat, a mountain lion, a domestic dog, and a human. You could probably look at the taxa and figure out which ones are most closely related, but for all intents and purposes, I want you to base it on its specific taxonomy. So who are the most related?
Cat and lion.
Yep, the cat and the lion. They are related all the way down to the genus, so they're just of a different species. More closely related to the mountain lion or the human?
Mountain lion.
Yes, because if you look at their order, they are all of carnivora, whereas we are primates. So which 3 taxa, which 3 levels do all of the organisms have in common?
Yeah. Excuse me. Animalia, chordata, mammalia.
Yeah.
I don't
So
think
my
I even.
pronunciation is terrible. I'd be like, mammalia. And my kids are always like, Miss Phillips, it does not say that. But you know what I'm talking about. It's okay. And at what level do humans diverge from other organisms?
Order?
Order. So we're of a different order. Again, if I put an ape on here, then probably the ape and human and a house cat and mountain lion would have been very closely related. Good. Do we have any questions? We all right?
Like, I just don't get about how is it phylum
Mm-hmm.
in the class, how do they differ?
Okay, let me go back here. So a common feature can be something very, very like non-specific for the phylum. So it could literally be something like we all have a 4-chambered heart. That could put us in the same phylum.
Okay.
And then when you move to a class, that is organisms that share common attributes. So like all mammals carry their babies on the inside. Like all mammals don't lay eggs. Does that make sense?
Sort of.
So it's, when we talk about like what attributes, it's kind of, some of them are a little gray and a little bit hazy, and some of them can be very, very vague. So literally, the reason why we, fish, birds, reptiles are all in the same chordata is the heart. Our hearts all have more than 1 chamber, and we're all multicellular.
And everyone, chordata, a 4-chamber heart.
Some of them do, but the common feature here is that exoskeleton. So all of these guys have the skeleton on the outside.
Okay.
And then some spiders don't cleanly fall into here, but they're still classified that way.
Okay.
And then when you move to class, so in terms of all mammals, none of us except for like a platypus, but none of us lay eggs. We all carry our young on the inside. So that's what makes us mammals, part of it, and being warm-blooded and stuff like that.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. So let's go. This right here, I will put in the chat for later and let people explore. So one of the things I wanted to give you guys tonight was some resources that you can use with your students or some resources that you can use to practice. This is a virtual lab. Glencoe who makes our textbook, has really, really good virtual labs. So in a lot of the schools in CMS, we don't have good lab material. But this is a little virtual lab that goes through taxonomy. And I know some people are driving and some people are on phones. So I'll just save this for later. If people want to explore it on the call, or if they just want to explore it on their own time, feel free to do so. Or if it's something you might want to give to your kids, that would be great for them too. So we will come right back to this one. Let's talk about ecology. Here we are. So this is going to be the most basic crash course of ecology. It's going to be enough to get you through the test. It is not going to be everything, because ecology and life science and chemistry and physics, the topics are so big. Remember that this test only has like 150 questions. So they're not looking for the itty bitty teeny tiny specifics. They're making sure that you just kind of have a general understanding of the concepts. So when we talk about ecology, we're talking about how things interact in the biosphere. The biosphere is the area of Earth where all life exists. That means we're extending from the oceans to a few kilometers above land. So basically a few miles up in the atmosphere where life can still exist. There are several different biomes, 6 terrestrial or land biomes, and an example of a biome would be something like the tundra or the desert, the rainforest. So they're just, biomes are just areas of similar climate or vegetation. An aquatic biome will be like the coral reefs or the oceans themselves or lakes. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then in those biomes, you have different ecosystems. So an ecosystem is composed of biotic, which means living, and abiotic things, and how they interact. So we, as humans, have an ecosystem, but we still interact with all these living and non-living things. All of us make up one ecosystem in the current biome that we live in. When we talk about ecology, about how all of these different things interact within their ecosystem. I see a couple of people taking notes, so I don't want to rush too far here because these are kind of important vocabulary terms. So I'll let people gather for about 30 seconds. I'm also eating rice, so I'm sorry.
You've got to eat sometime. That's good.
I just got home, so sorry, guys.
Hopefully you're in the rice with chopsticks. All right. Okay, well. Well, this is not a spoon, right?
I usually do eat it with a spoon because I'm a child, but my chopstick skills are still on point.
Are they?
All right.
Okay.
My mom believes she's Japanese on the inside, so she taught us a lot of stuff. Neither here nor there. All right. In your ecosystem, you have communities. All ecosystems, including the biotic and abiotic factors, can be broken down into populations and communities. So we're going to talk about communities first, and then we'll talk about some population dynamics. When you have a community, all organisms in a community survive by either producing or consuming food. So this ecology part kind of overlaps with the human impact part of the test, which is like the last little 10, 11%. That's like the human impact and technology. So these kind of overlap a little bit right here. When we talk about our organisms in our community, we're focused on this little triangle right here. At the bottom, in the biggest part of our triangle, you have your autotrophs, which are your producers or your plants. So these are usually the green things that can produce their own food using sun, water, air, those good guys. They can photosynthesize. Then moving up, you have your heterotrophs. You can have primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, and you can keep going on in terms of your consumers. But essentially, primary consumers are anything that eat the producers directly. Secondaries eat primaries, tertiaries eat secondaries, and so on and so forth. The important,
Question, excuse
yes.
me. Are we supposed to be like seeing like a picture or something?
Oh my goodness, y'all, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mine was
I thought it was my computer. I'm like, I know my computer been acting slow, but oh goodness, okay.
Thank you. That's better.
I was wondering why all y'all were looking at me like, what are we looking at? Brianna, thank you. Appreciate it. So here we go. There we go. At the bottom of our triangle, we have our autotrophs. And then moving up, we have our consumers. So primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. And like I said, it can keep going on from there. So we as apex predators are sitting up here usually at the tertiary level because there's really nothing that eats us. But one important thing about this triangle is what we call the log 10%, right? I don't know if anybody heard of that thing before?
No.
Okay. So it's the reason why we as humans have to eat so much of the lower consumers. Essentially what that rule says is that only 10% of the energy from the level before is transferred to the consumer. So if our producers, our autotrophs, take in 100% of the energy from the sun, when they are eaten by that primary consumer, only 10% of that energy is transferred on. So that primary consumer has to eat a good amount of that producer in order to get the energy that they need. That means if a secondary consumer eats a primary consumer, it has to eat a lot more primary consumers to get the energy that it needs, and so on and so forth. So when we talk about energy levels, this is when ecology, it's really going to try to focus on like what happens if something goes wrong in this web. So this food web right here starts with grass and seeds at the bottom as our producers. There's our beetles, grasshoppers, caterpillars, and mice. Those are all things that would eat our primaries. And if you notice, the arrow points away from, so it's showing you where the energy is transferred to. So seeds give their energy to mice, seeds give their energies to the rats as well. You'll also know that some of the tertiary consumers don't just eat secondaries, they might skip down to primary. So for instance, owls eat not just rats, but they also eat mice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at a problem because it's going to ask you like, what happens if we affect a part of this web? How will it affect people towards the top or towards the bottom? In the problem I'm going to show you, it's going to be a very similar web, except it's going to be flipped on its side. So it's going to come from the release Praxis. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to kind of read and see if you can understand it first, and then we'll practice some questions. So in our picture here, each letter represents a different species, and the arrows show the flow of materials and energy. So it's showing you where the energy is going to, not where it's coming from. In our graph, species U at the bottom is most likely a what? I see some people talking, but some people are muted, so I can't hear you.
A.
Producer.
Yeah, producer. If you're at the bottom, you are producing, so you are the primary source. So remember that this image here again is similar to here. That would be the U at the bottom. It's just flipped sideways instead of up and down. So in this case, U would be a producer. It's going to give all of its energy to the next level up. So that means Z would have to be what?
Primary.
Oh, big,
Z would have to be a primary. So which of the following species most likely belongs to the fungi kingdom? Think about what funguses do or how they're made. So it's the only word we haven't fully talked about yet, but I think you guys can get this.
Would it be Y?
Composer, so Y?
Other way. So a decomposer is formed from everybody giving off their energy. So it would actually be
W.
Oh,
W.
W.
Yep, species W, which is B up here at the top. So W is a decomposer, which means it receives energy from everybody and then breaks it down into a product that's usually recycled back into the earth. Now, when we think about our decomposers getting energy from everybody, this might not mean that it's consuming other things. It could mean that it's getting its energy through the byproducts or waste of some of the other things. That's why all the arrows point towards W.
Can we see the pyramid again really quickly before we do the next one?
This one?
Yes.
So if you had a decomposer, they would kind of be towards the bottom of this guy. They kind of don't fit nicely into the autotrophs and heterotrophs thing because they're their own little separate category. Let me know when you're good.
I'm good now.
One more question with the same graph. So suppose that a toxic substance enters the ecosystem. The concentration of the toxic substance will most likely be highest in the tissues of which of the species? This one tends to get people a little bit. But I will give you an example in a second if we're not, to
X?
help you think about it.
B, species X.
X.
Yes.
Because that would be someone like us consuming a lot of different toxic individuals or materials or things.
Mm-hmm. So the example I was going to draw to help some people understand, if anybody's been pregnant or knows a pregnant woman or knows anything about pregnancy, pregnant women are told not to eat specific fish because fish contains mercury. Now, each individual tuna might have a little bit of mercury in its body, but that does not really affect the tuna. But when we consume tuna, we have to eat more than one fish, so that increases the concentration levels in us. So if a pregnant woman eats too much tuna, she's or not just tuna, shark, whatever fish is high in mercury count, she will increase the amount of mercury in her body, even though it does not necessarily harm each of the individual fish that she consumes. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's how we understand that question. You guys are awesome. So also when we talk about our community, we have to talk about the ways that our different substances or different organisms interact. Most of these I'm sure you've heard of, but I just wanted to run through them really quick. So we like to say there's 5, 6, sometimes we say symbiosis, which is the same as one of these, different interactions amongst organisms. So starting with our top, we have competition. That is when 2 or more organisms are literally trying to fight over the same amount of resources. So here we have our little woodchuck and some birds trying to fight over the same amount of food seed. And we'll come back to competition in a second because this is really important to our populations. Second, we have predation, so predator prey. Third, we have annoying all parasitism. So just like mosquitoes, they feed off of us. The key here is that parasitism, only one of the organisms benefits while the other one is harmed. In predation, same thing. Okay, one is killed. Mutualism is when both organisms benefit. So a bee pollen is eating from the flower and spreading the pollen, therefore both organisms are good. And then we have commensalism, where you have one organism that benefits and the other organism doesn't really do either. It's no benefit or no harm to it. So in the case with these little suckerfish, they are getting food and leftovers off the shark, but the shark is not really receiving any benefit. It's not being harmed, but it's not receiving any benefit. So this is a commensalism relationship. Whereas if you think about like the hippos with the little birds on them and the little birds eat the flies, that's more mutualism because the birds are doing a service for the hippo and helping him stay bug-free. Questions on woo, any of these?
What was the name of that last one again?
Commensalism. I say it wrong every time, but I actually watched a video right before the call to make sure I said it right tonight.
Also, wouldn't the suckerfish benefit from the? They don't benefit from the shark or whatever they're.
Yes. So in this relationship, the suckerfish does benefit, but the shark neither benefits nor is harmed. That's why it's commensalism.
Okay.
If the shark was also getting some benefit from this, then it would be mutualism.
Okay.
So just a couple other things to talk about. This one is population. So in our ecology, the most specific group of organisms is a population. This is a group of individuals of the same species. So human population, dog population, pigeon population. Okay. In populations, each population has its own niche, which means its total specific way of life. So we're talking about its habitat, its place in the food chain. Is it competing? What interrelationship does it have with other organisms? So as humans, we are at the top. Our population is towards the top of the food chain. We're the biggest consumer. We have the most impact. We have a lot of issues, and we are affecting the niches of many other populations that we have to interact with. One of the biggest ways is by thinking about these two concepts right here, and it's population growth. So in communities and populations are going to grow unless they hit one of two things. So first, populations will grow until they reach their biotic potential, and that's what a J-curve graph shows you. A biotic potential means that you have reached the perfect amount of resources. You have the perfect amount of resources to support that population. Then you have an S-shaped curve, and this is what we call carrying capacity. This literally means that the environment can support no more. Therefore, no more can be sustained here. So in a biotic potential, it means everything's kind of like at equilibrium. We've got the resources, we've got life, and everything keeps going. When you've reached carrying capacity, that means that if you have any more organisms, you have reached, you're critically over the limit. There's not enough resources, so we're going to start falling back into competition or predation, and some things are going to have to shift so the population can start to even itself back out. Okay. So taking these two things into account, we have a question right here. It says, which of the following statements is accurate regarding global population growth? Let's take a look. Got a couple answers coming in.
C.
I agree. Why would this be C? Because I agree with you, but why is this C?
Well,
Basically, it's going. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, like it's like the J curve, like it's a constant growth.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no shift or there's no change.
Exactly. I agree with you. Also, so you could, if we're using process of elimination, a question like B could be eliminated because that's talking about an S-shaped curve. Brianna said the answer is C because we are talking about that J curve. Our selected population, we did not even talk about, so D could go away. And then if it would say if the infant mortality rate was exceeding the death rate, we would still also end up with an S-shaped curve. We would start hitting a carrying capacity over there. How are we feeling, guys?
Good.
So again, I'm gonna drop these in the chat, and this actually took less time than it took the first time around. People, you guys picked on all this stuff. Oh my gracious, I'm stuttering today. Sorry. This seemed to be a lot easier for everybody, which was great. So what I want to do is throw the exit ticket up for people who were like, okay, I'm good on this stuff. I'm ready for the next session next week. Also, if you have not had a chance to take quiz 2, you could take that tonight, but